Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another 280 Group Leadership Webinar. My name is Roger Snyder. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at 280 Group. Thank you for joining us this morning. Things have certainly been moving fast, and here at 280 Group, our goal is to help product managers and product marketing managers address challenges head on. We keep listening to our community, and we try to provide topics that are engaging. Today, we begin a two-part series on mastering digital product management. And David, you could advance it to the next slide. That would be great. I'm joined this morning by David Nash. He's our principal consultant and trainer here at 280 Group. David is a recognized expert in product management, product marketing, entrepreneurship, and team development. He delivered generations of successful technology products across many different segments, hardware, software as a service systems, and is an expert in B2B software as a service, pricing, user experience, and in-app user engagement. He has built several best practices PM teams and high performance teams as a product management leader in various companies at all stages of growth. He helped leadership roles as vice president and senior vice president. David's also a recognized community builder, coach, and bar raiser, and is a founder of Product Camp Portland, which has been going on since 2012. So David, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, everybody. Greetings from beautiful Portland, Oregon.
That's right, and I am here in Los Gatos. It says Santa Cruz Mountains, and that's where I was supposed to be, but PG&E decided to pull power from my house, so I actually came to the office today. So I'm the only one in the office, so don't worry, we're practicing good social distancing. I'm the only one here. So let's move on to the next slide, and we'll do a couple of housekeeping items. This is, like I said, part of the Product Management Leadership Series, and you can join our LinkedIn group to continue to hear more about this series, as well as see lots of great tips on how to lead as a product manager. And I will put I'll put this link into our chat box in a moment. Right now, I want to get on to the webinar details. We really encourage you to ask questions during the webinar. And so please use the question box to enter your questions. We'll accumulate these questions over the course of the webinar and then have a Q&A session at the end where we can try to answer as many questions as we possibly can. The most commonly asked question is, can you watch this webinar later? And the answer is yes. We will send you an email with a link afterwards that will allow you to access this webinar from our website anytime you want to view it. We often get asked whether or not we share the slides, and since the slides contain a number of our course materials, we don't share the slides directly, but we do allow you to do the webinar live, and so we encourage you to view that webinar whenever you like. And like I said, we'll send out that link later on. All right, let's keep going. So a little bit about 280 Group. We love interacting with you guys, and so we encourage you to answer questions like we talked about earlier. Our mission at 280 Group is to help companies and individuals do great product management and great product marketing. We like to empower product managers to do these great things. So let's talk a little bit about what we offer. This slide talks about our various services. I'm not going to tell you about them. We're just here to help you improve your skills or your team skills, and we offer a variety of services. If you want to learn more, check us out at 280group.com. All right, so today, Product Management Leadership Series, we have several different themes for these various different installments in our series. And if you animate the slide a little bit, David, you'll see that today our series is in the vein of professional development. So as a product management leader, we're hoping that you gain an understanding, a deeper understanding of what it means to be a digital product manager. And like I said, this is a two-part series, and Dave will kind of go over what's going on with the digital product management landscape in two parts. All right, so that's all about us. Let's talk about the audience. So today we see that we've got 52%, over half of the group are product managers and product marketing managers. We have a good representation of directors and vice presidents as well. That's great. So there's 16% in those groups. And we have some product owners joining us today. That's also awesome, good stuff. And then there's a lot of folks that probably work with product managers, work around product managers, and want to know more about what it is a product manager is doing and how can they help, as well as what can they hope to get out of the product manager's role, especially in a digital product management role. So a good group for us today, David. All right. So, David, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point. You can introduce the series and dive into the materials.
All right, thank you, Roger. Again, pleasure to be here with you all this morning. That guy in the photo a few slides ago had a haircut. That was me approximately 60 days ago. So I bear some resemblance to that, sans the haircut. So as Roger said, this is the beginning of a new series. We're really excited about it. This particular topic is a two-parter. Today we're going to talk about some of the fundamentals of user engagement, what it means, what does the term even mean, and we'll build a foundation that we're going to come back to ongoing. The first click in that will be next month, about a month from today, June 18th, I think it is. We'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into improving engagement, onboarding, and gamification, but lots more to come on this topic. This topic is exploding. It's a vital interest to our community. That's all of you. And so it's vitally important for us to share this with you. I'm going to do the world's fastest introduction of lean startup. Many of you have seen these models before. I want to use them kind of as a context setter today. There's two things that we really try to orient ourselves to in the world of the digital product manager. The first is this very famous model on the left, really created by Eric Ries some years ago in the lean startup. It's called the build, measure, learn loop. And you know, it's interesting because this is the circle of actions, if you will, the triad of actions we take continuously. And while it was conceived for startups, I'm here to tell you that it's not just for startups at all. This model is at least as important and perhaps even more important for established companies, established product lines. And the reason is that a startup is often looking for data from a very small user base. They're extrapolating a lot. But on the other hand, many of us are working or have worked for large companies with established products and established customer bases where you have a ton of data at your fingertips. And so really what a startup craves, larger enterprises really have much more ready access to. So that's what we're doing. Ideas, hypotheses turn into things we wind up building. We deliver something. We're measuring constantly to get signals and sensors from that product about use. We build a data set, which is ongoing. We mine that data over and over. We learn and we pivot and adapt. And the things we're doing on the left are in service of learning the things on the right. So number one is, as product managers, we want to make sure the things that we're building are valuable and usable, that they're going to have customers who want to throw their money at us, who are going to buy these products and use these products. So we start at value. Circling counterclockwise from the top, we also want to know, from a technology point of view, that it's feasible. That is, can we build it? Do we have the technology? Can we make it simple? Can we make it affordable? Can we make it reliable? All those things. And last but not least, even in some cases more important earlier than can we build it, is should we build it? So the issue of viability. Is this a business model that's attractive for us to pursue and invest always scarce resources? And I don't care whether you have one team of engineers because you're a startup or you have 150 engineers. I've been in both environments. However many engineers you have, there are never enough to feed your dreams. You have to make tough choices. And so this notion of viability is super important. So that's the model. Again, probably the world's fastest overview of lean startup model. Thank you, Eric. And really the domains that we're testing in. But the bottom line, probably the key takeaway, is this is all really nice theory. And it's all a hypothesis when you're jotting it down on the cocktail napkin and doing your first, customer research calls. And it's not real until you measure it, until you validate it, until you understand all the things that you thought you knew, but wound up learning very differently. So that's lean startup in a nutshell.
I really like that image there on the right, the valuable, feasible, viable. I think if product managers just sketched that out and pinned it to their wall and just looked at it every day as they're considering the next request from sales, the next request from marketing, the latest customer feedback, and just ask themselves those three questions. Of course, they're going to have to get the whole team's help on all of this in some aspects, but it would really help the product manager make good decisions.
No question about it. Thanks, Roger. So let's move ahead. Most of the folks who come to our webinars are working, and again, as our data indicated, Some 52% of you today are working PMs, POs, product marketing managers, and you probably have something in market already, perhaps several products, perhaps a portfolio of products if you're a VP or director or leader on the phone today. And you know, this didn't happen accidentally. You started with a plan, and while it has been a couple of months since most of us have been on an airplane, I wanted to harken back and share with you a metaphor that I think everybody will get. And that is that every flight starts with a plan. Now, you went on Kayak or Google Flights or whatever, perhaps your airline that you're loyal to, and you bought a flight. In my case, I wanted to fly from Portland to New York, where my family is. I planned this thing, and yes, I had to cancel it the last couple of weeks because Corona, thank you. But we've made a flight plan. I knew what it was going to cost. I knew how roughly how long it would take. I made my trade-offs. I had those levers to slide in terms of budget and layover and all those things. I made a choice. And just as you have made choices in your products, you've written product requirements, you've written user stories, you've written a product vision and communicated that, and you believe that's what you're going to do. And then you get on the airplane and life happens. And this is actually a gross simplification of what happens on most commercial flights. You file that flight plan, you take off from Portland, and a number of things happen. You have bad weather. How many times have you heard the captain say we're going to, descend or ascend 10,000 feet to get out of the bad weather or the chop? You have fuel issues, you have unplanned traffic, all kinds of things. And so the flight you wind up flying is often very different. You can pivot. By the way, there's probably dozens of micro adjustments. I'm just calling out some of the coarse, unplanned adjustments that happen during a flight. And this is very real world. And so your best conceived hypothesis for how you're going to get there, it often changes. So it's a powerful metaphor. I think we can all relate to it. Make plans and, just be ready for them to change. So with that, we're going to open our first poll of the day, and I think Roger's going to facilitate that for us.
Absolutely, very good. All right, so I'm launching the poll. Why don't you go ahead and read it out for everyone?
Yeah, so if you're not deeply familiar with user journey, I'll define the terms a little more in about 5 minutes. Suffice it to say for now, this is what you think users will be doing when they're inside your product. And in the lack of formal tools or methodologies, here are some of the common ways that we found product managers and their development partners and operations partners do these things today. Some of us mine server logs. They go back through Apache logs and see what pages customers visited. Some have customer survey tools they send out afterwards saying, what are you using and how frequently? Sometimes your support team can jump in and spoof a user and understand what the user is doing, kind of see through the user's eyes. Sometimes your product is fully instrumented, and that's a good day for all of us. We'll get back to that in a minute. And sometimes you don't have a clue. Sometimes you don't really know what's going on inside your product.
Right, and to help with that last one, if you're in the not yet knowing what a user journey is, we're going to help answer that question for you. And of course, you may use a combination of these things, right, David?
Yeah, there often isn't a one-size-fits-all, and sometimes you are bringing a new set of sensors online, if you will, a new set of eyes and ears to look at your product while you're still attached to the old one. So I've worked at companies where we had little bits of all of these things just to try to cobble together a holistic picture of what's going on. Right. So yeah, often there's a portfolio of solutions.
So I will encourage folks as you're answering this, and you do multiple ones of these, choose the one that you feel like your company is most strong at. If you're doing multiple, just choose the one that you're doing most strongly. We've got almost 60% of folks have voted, so I'm going to leave the poll open for just a little bit longer so we can get as many folks' opinion on this as possible. And I do think that it's important, if you're not doing these things, to be trying them. And we are certainly going to talk about some of the hows and whys of this as we move forward. All right.
Exactly. I, for one, have worked on teams and led teams where we had a whole variety of these types of sensors, and some of it was ugly, some of it was really hard to ask engineers to go in and crack open Apache server logs, and yet we did it because it was our only way of having a clue of what was going on in the product.
Right. All right, I'm going to close the poll now, and let's see what the results were. I'm going to share out the results. All right, so David, 19% of folks said that they mine server logs. 64%, which is the largest number by far, say they do customer surveys, which is extremely encouraging. That's great. 21%, the support team has tools for understanding what's going on in the user world. And then 28%, and this is a number that's been going up, and I really love to see it rising more. Our product is instrumented to capture this, so that's encouraging. And yeah, 14% said, what's a user journey? So that's good. There's a portion of the audience that is going to learn what a user journey looks like and how to go about that. So good poll results, but very encouraging.
All right. Thanks everybody for the response, and thanks Roger for the readout. That's fascinating and honestly very consistent with what I've seen over the last few years doing this and working with other folks who are doing this. So, staying with our airplane model for just a moment, there's a metaphor about flying blind, and this is not an academic theoretical discussion. I too have flown blind for longer than I wanted to. Again, working in companies with very successful products, by the way, with tens of thousands of customers and many large enterprise customers with thousands of users at each account. And often we didn't know what our customers were doing. And I want to stress that these were commercially very successful products, rapidly growing companies. And yet the state of the art, as recently as a few years ago in 2016, 2017, was that there were not a variety of tools that are really cost effective and just really pervasive. And so you had to do things the hard way. And so we didn't know what customers were doing. Sometimes you wouldn't know customers weren't using the product or weren't satisfied with the product until they churned. If you're not familiar with churn, that's the bottom of your bucket with the holes in it where customers fall out, they don't renew. And that's never a good day to find out your customers weren't using your product until they churn. And we also didn't know where their victories were, where their struggles were inside. So that's been my experience. Again, it certainly was a company that was very well led and very typical of particularly large B2B or enterprise companies that just have a lot of customers and were not raised in the period where they had to measure all of this stuff. And so moving ahead, I want to share with you two concepts really for the rest of our session today. The first is this notion of a user journey, kind of just a working definition for it on the left. It's a series of steps that your users will take to accomplish a task. Generally, these are planned. Generally, these are optimized for them. When you're thinking about user journey from a planning perspective, you're often thinking about how can I take the current journey and optimize it, maybe take out some unnecessary steps, maybe not ask customers for information we already ought to know about them. And the other really key point about user journey is sometimes you'll hear customer journey and user journey used interchangeably. And that's often valid for B2C products, consumer products, where the buyer and the user are the same. However, and I can't stress this enough, for B2B products, for enterprise products, very often the buyers and users are very different. The buyer is a person your sales team is calling on, your customer success team is calling on, and they are sometimes user proxies, sometimes they're a department manager, they're a chief something or other, they're a senior executive with the budget to buy your product, but there may be hundreds or thousands of users who have no other relationship with your company than that of using the product. And so that's really where the user journey becomes vital. Because you're the only part of the company, by the way, that's really charted with understanding users, because the sales and marketing team are charted very clearly with driving awareness preference for the buyers. So that's user journey. User engagement, again, is really a long-time discipline that's come into sharp focus over the last few years, and that really helps us reveal some behavioral actions, inclinations about how users are responding to things in the product, what they're doing, what they're not doing. There's many dimensions to this. We'll get into that in just a moment. And when we talk about users, we talk about them as individuals, we talk about them as groups of people, and we talk about them not just in the moment, but over time. So how are things trending? And just again, as a quick setup, this is multidimensional. And our job is to really look at these users through a couple of different lenses. The first is we really want to understand, before we attempt to do anything or interpret, we want to just watch, we want to learn, we want to watch that engagement, we want to see what users are doing. We want to really understand what are the intended versus unintended outcomes. The ones on the left, the intended ones, are the ones you want them to experience. And then there's always unintended outcomes as well. So that's the watching part. But we're watching in service of doing something better. And we're going to find out that it's very helpful to guide users, not just when they're struggling, but sometimes when they're successful as well. We want to intervene thoughtfully, selectively, respectfully, but there are times when we're going to want to intervene. When users do things that are rewarding for them, we want to set them up so they do it again. We want to reinforce those behaviors so they form habits that are good for them, and good for our product, and good for our business. And overwhelmingly, we want to simplify. I can tell you, having worked at a number of B2B companies and enterprise software companies for more than the last decade, that B2B products often grow up through generations of being responsive to large customers. These large customers often have workflows that are slightly different. And so before too long, in service of large, demanding, high-spending enterprise customers, you're adding a lot of specific features because no two companies have the same workflow. And so therefore, there becomes 10 ways to do any one thing. And that felt really good in the moment, but delivering a Swiss Army knife is often not what people want. They just want a screwdriver or just want a blade. And so simplifying for B2B products is something which we just don't do enough of as a product marketing discipline, and is often very high ROI.
Yeah,
And the bottom line, sorry, Roger, go ahead.
I said, I completely agree. This simplify point, I think, is crucial, especially in B2B, but as well as in B2C, right? If you have neat little extra features and you tuck them away somewhere for the expert user, but still allow the main flow to be nice and simple and really get the job done that customers want, or to just be delighted by that experience, if it's a game, for example, then you're accomplishing that, right? And so this two-step thing of learn what they need and then do the right things to deliver it is crucial.
Yeah, could not agree more. And the bottom line is you want to link the user outcomes and the product outcomes to the business impact. This is a huge topic in and of itself. We'll explore this in a future webinar, but really making sure that when the user wins, your company wins. That's easier said than done. And you don't know what the user winning looks like until you've looked at it, deep enough and long enough. So that's what we talk about, linking user outcomes to things that will drive revenue, drive retention, lower churn, drive referrals, all those things that our businesses care about. So this notion of in-product software and usage analytics has been around for a few years, but it's really gone through a renaissance of sorts. There's been a ton of studies on this. You can probably Google and within 5 minutes find several more of these. But one that kind of made me chuckle was, for anybody familiar with Gartner, Gartner does the hype cycle pretty much for everything. And as recently as 2018, they included software usage analytics in actually 3 different hype cycles that year for SaaS tools and customer support tools. And this product category of software usage analytics showed up on all 3 of them at the peak of inflated expectations. Mm-hmm. This is Gartner speak for something. There are tons of expectations. It's on the rise, but it really hasn't proven its worth yet. Here we are 2 years later, and I can tell you, having implemented a couple of these tools commercially and having worked with a lot of other folks who've chosen other tools, I think this software is really starting to come onto its own today. In my experience, again, from my seat, I haven't really seen it fall into the dreaded trough of disillusionment. I've seen it really level out into this plateau of productivity. And I think the real key with these tools is not that the tools are invaluable, but really understanding how a craftsman uses their tools is really in getting the most value out of the tool, not that the tools, value is inflated.
Right, absolutely. And I think for folks who maybe not be familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, just think 3D television when you think proper vision, right? And that will give you an idea of where some products end up. And that can be the end of that product's journey, as it was with 3D television, right?
Where's my flying car? Exactly.
That's right.
So there's a ton of tools, right? You always know an area is exploding when the venture money pours in, the private equity money pours in, and there's now a ton of companies. These are just a few. There's probably a dozen more companies that are in this area of so-called in-product user analytics. These are some of the ones I'm most familiar with. By the way, I lead an event here in Portland called Product Camp, and perhaps you have product camps in many of your own cities. And so these are the kinds of sponsors that come to these conferences because their tools are so valuable that they want to make product managers aware of them. So there's two takeaways here. First off, in the third decade of the 21st century, you should not build this yourself. You may have some really smart engineers who say, I can build this. I'm telling you, don't do it. These products are not commoditized yet because they provide a lot of value, but there's a competitive field of companies doing this. Do your homework, select your criteria, do a proof of concept. Do not build this yourself, because you can find solutions off the shelf from some of these leading companies here, and you can find the one that will best meet your needs, and they're more affordable than ever. The other thing I'd leave you with is a lesson that I had to learn going through this, is to instrument everything. All of these products rely on some sort of a JavaScript widget that you drop into your code. You drop into sometimes every page. It's a little widget that is the sensor, if you will, the thing that reports back to, the Pendo backend or the Amplitude or Heap or Mixpanel backend. They're all fairly similar. And the idea is that this is really the easy part, is dropping in the code. Your developers will figure this out, in less than a week. There'll be a bunch of testing, but there's no reason not to measure everything. You will find out over time you're collecting some garbage data. You can throw away some pages that aren't really part of the workflow. You'll have extraneous data that's part of your journey, but don't be cheap when instrumenting this, because this JavaScript should go everywhere. It's super easy. You may have to open some UDP ports in your firewall, in your data center. You may have issues around iframes and what the sensors see and what it doesn't. But my advice to you is put it everywhere, because you can't analyze data that you don't collect. So collect everything, and you'll figure out before too long, what's the most important and what can you ignore.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a learning journey.
It really is. So let's actually peel back the onion a little bit and introduce the dimensions of user engagement. By the way, the reason there's a Pendo logo there on the lower left is that I used Pendo very, very personally and deeply over the last 3 years. And it's a great product. All these products are good products, but I wanted to just draw Pendo because it was really near and dear to me. But what I'm going to share with you now is very typical of all the products whose logos you saw on the prior slide. And so these are representative areas, but if there's any other Pendo users out there, I'd love to hear, by the way, what tools you're using in the comments. So if you throw some comments in there, it'd be very helpful for us. But you'll see a strong affinity here for Pendo if you're familiar with that tool. So these are some of the dimensions. We'll discover breadth, which is really, how many active users do you have in your product? We'll talk about depth, which is how much of your product are they using? We'll go through frequency, which is, how often are they coming in, and how long are they staying? We'll talk about paths and funnels, particularly for our B2B software, when there's more than one way to accomplish a particular goal. What are the ways that customers find most helpful, and where are they getting stuck? And then we will talk about how to provide feedback and sentiment. And feedback may be on specific features. Is this feature useful to you right now? How can we make this feature better? And asking customers in the moment when they're using it is a huge breakthrough that we just, once you have that capability, you don't ever want to give it up. And sentiment, these are things like, Net Promoter Score, and how are you feeling at this moment? Are you happy? What better time to ask customers when they're in the product versus 3 months later when they get an email campaign? So the bottom line for all of this, particularly if you're new to this, is when someone says, are people using our product? Don't accept usage as a metric. Usage is completely ambiguous. Usage shows kind of a lack of sophistication. By the way, been there, done that. That's where we all start. But I think very quickly we'll see that usage is almost meaningless when you really go through the different lenses of the elements of dimension here, elements of engagement. So let's peel through each of these quickly. First off, breadth. So let me, as Roger mentioned before, let me distinguish B2C apps and B2B apps. For consumer-facing apps, this is really as simple as how many active users do we have? These may be paying users, these may be free users who are on a free version of your product, but how many users do we have? For B2B, a little more interesting because, again, you have one customer, That customer may have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of users. So how many active users per paying customer do we have? Really, really important when you're talking about customer health, if you have a customer success team. And there's a couple of key metrics here. Let me throw one out where if you don't have a starting point, start here, and this is a great place. So a KPI or key performance indicator I'd recommend is so-called daily active users or monthly active users. Yes, of course, there's weekly active users too, but think about this as how many of customer X's licensed users who are physically able to use your product have used the product in the last 30 days. That's a great metric. That metric may not be a perfect fit for you, but it's a great place to start. Let me show you a real world example of where an enterprise software company has done this. So here's an account X, that has about 300 customers. And looking at the breadth indicator, we saw that of those 300 users, about a third of them are logging in once a day. More than a third of them are logging in once a month, and then a little less than a third are logging in weekly. So the very first thing you ask yourself is why what's going on here? Why are these three users different? These three bands of users, pardon me. And there could be all kinds of reasons. I don't know what the answer is. You will not know the answer at first, but it'll force you to ask the questions and look at the data. There could be all kinds of reasons why your users have banded into these three very clear strata. It could be as simple as they're different user personas. Maybe some are work initiators, processors, some are reviewers, some are approvers. There may be a multi-part B2B workflow, for example. So anyway, this will force you to ask the questions. The other place where we found this hugely valuable is if you have a customer success team for your larger accounts, you can arm your CSMs with this data, take them back to the customers and show the customer how they're using your product, how they're getting value from it. And you can give them insights that they're going to want to know, because as the buyer, they want to know that they're getting value from your product and they have a user base. And we found this to be tremendously helpful to feed this back to our buyers.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And that feedback loop is also used for B2C, right? So for example, some of your virus software now sends you a monthly report showing how effective it was in this last month doing things for you. It's a different category than this one, but I just was thinking about the fact that these feedback loops can be valuable B2B as well as B2C.
Oh, no question. And yeah, the key point is it's not just for us, but share it with the customers because they'll be grateful. So building on breadth, we then move on to depth. And depth, as the graphic implies here, as the icon implies, is all about how much of your product are they using. Are they using 20% of your features? The other 80%, may not be necessary. What features are they using the most? Which are they using the least? Which features are most valuable for specific user segments? For example, in the prior chart, for those three different bands of users, they may not be using the same exact features. Which ones get regular use? And if you really care about retention and churn, which you all should, which are the most sticky ones that are going to keep your customers coming back, time and time again to your product? So again, as a starting point for a metric, identify 5-ish features, probably not less than that, and probably not a whole lot more than that is necessary, that have been validated as leading retention indicators. And that can be your early warning as to customers who are being successful versus customers who are struggling. That's how we use this, and it was very, very helpful.
Yeah, another way to use this, going back to your earlier slide, is in the valuable category. If your hunches at first, hypotheses, right, at first are about what features in the product are going to be valuable, and you find that other features are getting used more than the ones you thought were valuable, you may be uncovering an unmet need that your product is actually meeting that you didn't anticipate. So this kind of metric can also be valuable for you to uncover, hey, wait a minute, people are all hanging out over on this side of the room. We should probably figure out how to make that even more valuable.
Good point, Roger. Here's another real world snapshot. 9% of features from customer X product Y were getting 80% of the clicks. I can't emphasize how often this happens in B2B software for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So this is really telling. So this forces you to say, hey, what's going on here? What should we do about it? We can really do a couple of things here. we can say, make sure if those 9% of all features are really where all the value is, we better make them easy to use, take all the friction out of it. Maybe those features are worth charging more for. Maybe you can remove some of those other 80% of those features over time and hide them. And if no one's using them, they won't notice when they're gone. So very, very key analysis here with specific actions you can take from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so with breadth and depth under our belt, let's move on to frequency. And frequency, you may think at first is similar to breadth, but it's a little different. This is not just, how many daily active users do you have, but when users do log in, how much time are they spending? What accounts are they from? And here again, a very key, simple metric to get started is let's look at the number of logins or time spent across users for a given customer over 30 days. One of the most important and common analysis that you'll do, particularly if you're running a SaaS business, is something called cohort analysis. And so here, you may not be able to read the slide because this was a screen scrape, but I wanted to call out a couple of things. So we looked at a cohort of users that had about 6 weeks under their belt. And over those 6 weeks, we noticed that by week 6, only 3% of the users were coming back. You might say, oh my God, is this the world's worst product? No, this was a very successful commercial product. But again, what's really fascinating is that different users are coming back for different reasons. And this is not uncommon for B2B software. So this made us ask the questions, what's going on here? What should we do? What's causing that? There could be all kinds of reasons. Maybe there were product glitches. Maybe when you onboarded that cohort of customers some 6 weeks ago, something in the product really had too much friction in it, was tough to find. People didn't know that a feature was available, hence they couldn't use it. Maybe your implementation team was struggling with this group of customers. Maybe didn't do the job they would normally do in getting your customers provisioned and implemented. Maybe it was a seasonal business. Maybe we've had a COVID-19 situation and your product's not being used for the last 90 days. Maybe it's a poor fit group of customers for this specific product because of geography, vertical market, et cetera. You don't know until you look in and have some hypotheses for these and try to take some actions based on what you're learning. So hugely valuable cohort analysis. And the last part about cohort analysis, again, real world, from a company who's discovered this, and so many established B2P and enterprise companies go through this. You could look at accounts, for example, that have not logged in at all over the last 90 days, might not have a CSM on them. And these are the companies that are not going to renew your product. And again, this is not a good day when you have, let's say, over $1 million of ARR or annual recurring revenue that's at risk because you didn't know that customers weren't using your product. Now, for a customer that has thousands of accounts, hundreds of enterprise accounts, and maybe 1,000 mid-market accounts, you might say, well, who cares about 14 accounts? Well, your CEO and your CFO will care about $1 million of ARR that you didn't know was about to walk out the door. So very, very key to look before you're the victim of churn.
Yeah, very important, definitely.
All right, so we're plodding along here. Let's move through paths and funnels. Paths and funnels, as their name implies, are all about when users are in your product, where are they going? How are they getting from point A to point B? Where are there multiple ways to get to the same finish line? Very often there are. What causes users to abandon a task? What does success look like if you're going to gamify? And we'll get back to that in a future topic. How do you reward people moving from one plateau of usage to deepen their engagement and use more advanced features? How long does it take to complete a typical process? So this is really a very effective way to measure your product efficiency and usability. So paths and funnels and going from point A to point B and paths of convergence are what we capture with this notion of paths and funnels. And our last two, I'm going to combine together. The first is in-product feedback for specific features. How many of us as product managers have done research and surveys and user groups asking about, is feature A or feature B more powerful, more valuable? If you can only get 3 things on this roadmap instead of the 10 things you want, which of the three and why. So these things, which are our lifeblood in product, we can now do better than ever by doing it in product. Same thing for sentiment. So here's a couple of quick examples. You just use feature X in the lower left hand. What better time to ask a customer, how's that feature working for you? Can this feature be made any better? They're in the moment, and they're going to give you the best possible feedback versus being asked by an email survey months from now. And on the sentiment point of view, you could argue whether NPS is waxing or waning now. It's very popular still. There's other methodologies, but the bottom line is, what better time to ask about sentiment when you're in product as well. So these are key things that you just couldn't do before the advent of all those kinds of tools. And lastly, some of the products, and Pendo is one and there are others, provide the ability to not just ask questions in product, but intervene. And Pendo uses something called Pendo guides. And a guide is very simply a pop-up which will notice where you are, what you're trying to do, and may offer you help if you're stuck, may offer you a reward if you're successful, in a way to lead you to the next plateau of usage in the product. So really, really key stuff to be able to do this in product. If you're not doing this, you don't know what you don't know often until it's too late.
Yeah, these tools are amazing in terms of, I was doing app analysis a few years back now, before these tools existed, more than a few years, but I don't want to admit how many years ago, back when we were using Flurry, in fact, for instrumenting a mobile app, and we had none of these tools available. So all we had to do, it's awesome when you are able to instrument paths, right? So to your point about instrumenting paths, and I'll talk about that in just a second too, because I have a comment to make there, but we had to guess, you had to divine why users were having struggles at particular stages along their journey. And this new crop of tools, I wish we had these available when I was working on mobile apps, because then we could have just asked, right? We would have been able to pop up a question in a particular spot in that user journey where we could see there was a problem. So the path data helps us with that. But then we could ask a specific question of like, is there too much information asked at this step? Or are you getting confused? What is it that's slowing you down here? Or even offer suggestions of how could we make it better? Is it yes or no, or A or B, right? So there's just a lot more power available with this crop of tools that I think is amazing. Before we move on, Dave, I also want to comment about path. One thing I did find from my mobile app days was those path tools allow you to then measure, if you have like a 6-step process, maybe you're doing something like an online mortgage application, and there's a 6-step process, using path and funnel tools allow you to see, where do people get stuck? And how do I help make that step easier, right? So those kinds of tools I found very helpful. We were actually working on a photo album app, and we were finding that folks really got stuck when they had to try to go find their other pictures. So we tried to make that part of the experience easier, rather than having to paw through lots of directories. And so that was something that was an insight we gained by doing path and funnel.
Yeah, and speaking of asking questions, Roger's going to open another poll for you now about, of these dimensions that we just covered, again, breadth, depth, frequency, paths and funnels, feedback and sentiment. If you're already using one of the commercial tools that I mentioned earlier, or perhaps one I didn't mention, or if you're on the cusp, which of these do you think would be most valuable to you right now? And if you had to start, which ones would you start with? And again, check as many as applicable here. We're going to make this a fairly quick poll because we want to be mindful of our time, but I'd love to hear from you all now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the poll questions are coming in and people are answering. So we'll leave it open for just a little while.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you, and maybe I'll turn it around a little bit, David. Could you give me 2 different circumstances or 2 different use cases, if you will, and then which one of these would you choose for those 2? I'm putting you on the spot there, but or even just one.
Oh, no worries. One company I worked with had several different analytics offerings, and we used to sell what we call premium analytics, which allowed very, very in-depth analysis by sophisticated customers for all kinds of things that the so-called ad hoc analytics or entry-level reporting wouldn't do. And sometimes we had a very well-intended customer support staff who want to solve customer problems, and sometimes they would turn on those premium analytics for customers who weren't necessarily paying for them. And by the way, it was the right thing to do for those customers, but after enough time went by, we realized that we had a great monetization opportunity to actually sell those premium analytics to customers who were getting value from them. And the converse case is we had customers who were using premium analytics, but may have found them tough to use sometimes because they were sophisticated, but a little tougher to use. And so we'd have customers using the free analytics even when they were paying for the high-end analytics. So some insights we never would have considered.
Right. That's very interesting. Yeah. All right, I'll give the poll just a couple more seconds here. We've got a lot of good questions coming in as well, so we want to.
Terrific. Yeah, I do want to save some time.
Yeah, so let me close the poll and share the results. So what we saw was a nice spread, actually. So 21% of folks said they'd choose breadth, 16% said they would choose depth, 14% said they would choose frequency. Now 25%, this is the highest number, but just by 1 percentage point, who said paths and funnels. And then 24% said feedback and sentiment. So you've got nearly half split between paths and funnels and feedback and sentiment, which are pretty advanced tools. So this is a good crowd. It's got a lot of interest in some more advanced tools.
Yeah, thank you, Roger, and thanks everyone for the input. There's something in here for everybody, and hence all these tools makers are providing these very valuable solutions, which you're going to buy from one of them and not build yourself.
Right. Yes, definitely.
Let's move on to the last notion of two quick closeout topics. The first is, as product managers, we live and die by segmentation too, right? Because our customers and users are not homogeneous. And so likewise, with all the data you're looking at and some of the quick screenshots that I shared from historical data, here are some of the lenses to look through to really understand, how two different groups of users might have very different journeys and levels of engagement in your product. These are just some that I have gone through. There are any number of others. So don't forget that these tools may be meaningless or give you ambiguous answers unless you're overlaying your segmentation on top of them for B2C products and for B2B products. These are just some examples, but segmentation is critical here.
Right, absolutely. And these are all good. I like the revenue bracket one in particular. I did want to pitch a thought about the user roles one. Sometimes the admin aspects of a product get a lot less love than the main functionality for your large population of users. But especially if you're B2B, don't forget that those admins have a lot of sway. They're one of those stakeholders that at contract renewal time, if they haven't been happy, they can unfortunately sway a buying decision against you. So don't completely ignore some of the less used paths that might be being used by more influential stakeholders.
Excellent point. Yeah, so segmentation, it's always important. It's still important here. And the last thing I'll close out with today is this notion of where do you start? All of us have to reckon with this question when we start because we don't know what good looks like. So there's a lot going on here. I didn't do a build in the interest of time, but if we just look at this by the rows or swim lanes, we can look at breadth, for example, and set some guidance of what a champion, what would distinguish a champion customer, maybe having more than 10 active users from a healthy customer with 5, a customer that has room to grow at 2 to 5, or an at-risk customer who has less than 2 active users. If we look at features we're using, champion customers, role model customers, testimonial customers tend to use nearly all your features. Healthy customers use maybe 3 of the key ones. A customer with room to grow who might need some attention might use only 1 or 2 of the key features. And of course, if they're at risk, if they're only scratching the surface. And lastly, not surprisingly, frequency of use and time in product is another very, very key indicator. Look, the bottom line is you're not going to know at first because you probably haven't measured this. So you're going to start, you'll likely be wrong, but get started. And once you get started, you'll rapidly see over the course of probably 30 days, kind of where the high and low watermarks are. And this is the way you're going to get started and then be much more data informed about the decisions you're making in your product. So get those indicators set, get those thresholds set, and then plow forward.
Yeah, and depending on what industry you are in, there may even be some benchmarks for you to compare against out there, right? So for example, if you're in the healthcare industry or you're working on mobile apps for healthcare, there's enough analysts looking at that there may actually be some benchmarks for you to compare yourselves against. So don't hesitate to also go look out and look for some industry numbers that might help you also calibrate how well you're doing.
That's true, and often many of the tool vendors whose names I've mentioned a couple of times have blogs, and they're celebrating customer success, and you will very often find a peer group member of whatever industry you're in who has gone down the road a little ahead of you. So we're going to do our final poll for the day, and just kind of want to see if you are on your own journey, so to speak, with implementing these types of capabilities in your products in 2020. So I'd love to know if you already came in today with already plans to implement, if you're inspired enough to maybe think about doing a proof of concept or maybe do an initial vendor evaluation. If you think you want to go build this yourselves, good luck and Godspeed, by the way. And if you think, well, this is interesting, David, but you know what, I already have a full plate, so this is not going to happen this year.
Right, yeah, and this is tough going, especially right now where budgets may be particularly tight. But hopefully some of the earlier indicators that we've talked about can give you justification. If you're thinking about, I would love to put this into the budget, but how do I justify it? You can listen to the webinar again later and go back to that portion where David's just talking about how you're connecting this data to business outcomes. And can you find, or maybe you already have a problem that sales has already come to you with, like, look, we just keep seeing users drop off after 2 months of subscription. How do we solve that problem? This could be the way you solve that problem. So think about the inputs you're getting outside the digital domain in terms of your traditional conversations with customer service and with sales and understanding of all of the problems that you're facing. And could these tools help you solve that problem? That's going to be, I hope, an effective way for you to justify the budget for this. David, if you have anything else you want to add?
No, just interested to see the poll results, and then we can wrap up and hopefully take a couple of questions.
Oh yeah, we'll have time for some questions, definitely. All right, so I'm going to close the poll and I'll share the results with you. We have got a nice range here, actually. So 31% of folks said they already have plans to implement in 2020. That's awesome, bravo.
Awesome, that is awesome.
But now 25% are saying, hey, we're going to pursue a proof of concept. We want to try this out or do some sort of an evaluation. 5% are into building it themselves. Okay, these folks are going to roll up their sleeves and get it done themselves. And then 39% interesting but won't make the cut. And I'm hoping that my ideas might help you think a little bit more about, could you try this sometime in the future?
Well, thanks everybody for offering up your perspective, and thanks Roger for the recap. Interesting, good diverse group. All right, let's kind of take her out. We hit a lot today in the last 50 minutes or so. So let me just recap some of the key points. First, all that great stuff from the build, measure, learn loop and the viable, valuable, feasible model, it's all essential to our practice of building great products, but it's all theoretical until we validate it. So that's really key takeaway number one. The build, measure, learn loop, not just for startups anymore. If you're not an enterprise, if you're not using this methodology, you're missing out on something that's very simple and elegant and effective. The user engagement is multi-dimensional, so don't accept someone saying, what's our usage? We can do better than that. And in 2020, we should all do better than that. Lots of tools available. Do your shopping, pick one, and you'll really be amazed at the stuff that you'll know that you didn't know till now. Remember, segment, segment, segment. It's always been important. It's still important for interpreting your analytics. And again, if you are thoughtful, if you are restrained, and if you do it carefully, customers not only don't mind in product intervention, they're actually grateful for it, and you can help them in a moment of need. It's not intrusive. Let go of the fear, but again, be restrained and be thoughtful about it and intervene when necessary.
Absolutely.
All right. Roger, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Very good. So I'm going to launch this poll, and we're going to keep this poll in the background as we start answering some of our questions. And we got a lot of great questions today, David. So, and I don't think we'll have time for all of them. So I've tried to kind of bundle a few of them together. The first questions are around the areas of, is this kind of methodology or are these tools available for native apps? I think it's a quick answer for that one. The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. These tools are available. So many companies out there have started, and some have been acquired, some have grown. They're available for native apps, mobile apps on iOS, on Android, so overwhelmingly yes.
Right. So another question was, can you collect the data for DAU? Does it assume it's a web-based product? The question is, how is it collected? And so the answer is, it is often web-based, but like we just said, mobile apps work as well.
Yeah.
Another couple of questions here are, okay, so how do I do this for, say, manufactured products, non-digital products? What approaches could I use to gather these kind of KPIs for non-SaaS model software? So two different areas that I tackle today.
Good question. There's a plethora today of IoT products which may not have a user interface on them. They may be things like your Nest thermostat or your camera. Lots of privacy issues, by the way, here abound, particularly if you're in healthcare with HIPAA and all. But if your product has any connectivity back to a central back end, maybe for maintenance, maybe for updates, maybe for just sending instrumentation, then you can embed a sensor which shows usage there. Again, your customers are going to want to know you're doing it. They're going to want to opt in, let them know it's for data collection purposes only, and overwhelmingly customers opt in. If your product is not fundamentally connected as an IoT device or as a device with an actual user interface, it's going to be a lot tougher. I know for manufacturing areas and hostile environments, sometimes products have data loggers on them locally, but that requires, of course, sending out a person or a team of people to go check in with those data loggers occasionally if they have no other way to phone home. But you can do it. It makes it a lot tougher, though, if you have to go physically either go visit the device, makes it more expensive and time-consuming, and otherwise you only have the conventional inaccurate ways of just asking users.
Yeah, I want to answer that a little bit as well, David. There are clever ways to get some customer engagement going for non-digital products, even consumer packaged good products, right? So you can start clubs, so people want to join the club and get information, but also they then can participate in surveys that you formulate. You can put a QR code on a packaging that allows people to say, hey, if you've got feedback, scan this QR code and you can, again, join the club of our loyal users who want to give feedback or answer a one-time survey. And for anybody who joins those, then you have the opportunity, and you got to do this in a kind way that's intended not to just spam folks with lots of email, but on a regular cadence that matches the usage patterns for your products. Check in with those customers periodically via email and ask them to participate in follow-up polls. That way you are able to start trying to create a feedback loop and a way to get this input from your users. And it can be from a box of cereal as well as manufactured products. There's a lot more ways now to create a digital touch point to go along with your physical product. So I want to encourage folks to think about that.
That's great. The only thing I'd add to that, that's well said, Roger, is that customers really just want to be heard. I found this overwhelmingly. They expect no other reward or motivation except they want to be heard, and that is its own reward for them. And so, yeah, take advantage of that.
So a couple more questions are kind of in the vein of this question. What do you recommend, or what experience can you share in terms of the best method to gather engagement feedback specifically for feature feedback? Is it in person? Is it survey? I think we would probably say some of those tools that you suggested in that category. Do you have some other thoughts on that?
Yeah. And by the way, this is probably a great question we can answer in our blog online because I'll probably want to go into more depth than time allows. But yes, certainly asking in situ or in the product, as we indicated a couple of slides ago, is a really key way because it's top of mind then. All those areas that you mentioned are viable and helpful in terms of user groups, surveys that are individual and collective, and asking people not just to say what they want, but maybe understanding ranking and rating of those features and the context, really important, the non-quantitative but qualitative discussion about what they're trying to accomplish and how they feel about it, which is really, really key.
Good. So there's a couple more questions about physical products, and we talked a little bit about that. Let's close with this one last question, which is kind of a question about the set of tools. Are there any good, reliable comparison tools you recommend to making the buying decision for which of these tools should I choose from? They specifically said GP Crowd is leading in some cases. So
yeah, another really great question, and one that we won't have sufficient time to answer now. I would just say read voraciously. That's what I did back in 2016, 2017 when I selected the tool that I did at that time. And in the last 3-4 years, there have been, again, just the second and third generation of those tools and a bunch of new ones. Just dig in. If you look for in-product user analytics, you're going to have a ton of scholarly articles, blogs, and case studies and all. So it's much easier to do that journey now and do that education now than it was 3 years ago.
True. I would also suggest, as you do when you're buying a car or other major purchases in your personal life, ask friends. Talk to professionals who maybe are in a similar business to yours and see what their experiences were, right? And try to get some of that in-person feedback as well. Well, we have lots of left here, David. I think maybe we'll try to tackle those in a follow-up blog post, because this was a great set of questions that we weren't able to get to. But we're going to continue this conversation again next month, right? So you'll be back with me next month. We will be talking about this on June 18th, Mastering Digital Product Management Part 2, Onboarding and Gamification. And so I encourage you all to sign up for that. I'm going to put a link in here right now for you, and sign up, and we'll continue the conversation. We'll try to answer more of these questions offline. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found this useful, and we look forward to continuing the conversation next month.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right.